The Viking Holmgang, a trial by combat, how the Vikings settled their disputes. The Viking Holmgang was a duel between two people, deciding a dispute between them, their family or their local community. It could in some rare cases also be fought between several people fighting on two opposing sides. So, holmgang was basically a trial by combat. The name holmgang literally means home-going or small island walk, and it derives from the dueling of the battles on a small island, or home. At least in theory, all offended could challenge the other party to holmgang, regardless of their differences in social status. Well, unless you were a Viking thrall, these rules didn't apply to slaves, because they could then fight their way out of slavery, and of course the Vikings wouldn't allow that. It has always sucked to be a thrall. Holmgang could be a matter of honor, ownership or property, claims for return or debt, legal disagreement or intent to help a wife or relative or avenge a friend or a family member. In the interest of honor and family, your name was often defended in blood. This was because the Norse gods, and in particular, Tyr, the Viking god of justice, honor and courage, always ensured that the right man won. If your hard-earned Viking honor was threatened in any way, real or imagined, all that was needed to be done was to challenge your adversary to a first blood, or to a duel to the death, and justice would promptly be restored. And if you were challenged, you had to accept and fight, or you would become the lowest of the low in Viking society. You would become an outcast. A knighting. Because, for the Vikings, there were much worse fates than death, as described in Odin's poem, Havmol. Cattle die, friends die, you yourself die. But one thing that never dies, is the fame of a dead man's deeds. Let's take a closer look at the Viking Holmgang.
Þetta Víkingasaga með Magnus.
The rules of holmgang varied from place to place and changed over time, but before each challenge, the duelists had to agree on the rules for this specific holmgang, and if it was to first blood or to the death. You could also yield during the fight, and in this way lose, but save your life. The duel was usually fought either on a pre-specified plot or in a traditional place that was regularly used for this purpose. The battle often took place on a tiny island, or holm, and this was so that no man could run away from the fight, which of course, was a huge disgrace. The family of the two duelists would therefore demand that the duel would take place at a holm, making an escape from the duel very difficult. The reason their families insisted on this was, you may have guessed it, honor. Rules determined the permitted weapons, but the duel opponents were expected to have matched weapons, and they had to agree what constituted a defeat or forfeiture, and what the winner received. In Norway, the winner could claim everything the loser owned, including his wife. This meant that if you were poor and a good fighter, you could challenge a rich man to holmgang, and become a wealthy man, literally overnight. This was exactly what some fighters ended up doing, challenging someone wealthy they knew they would beat.
Jeg tenkte at jeg ville utfordre deg til en holmgang.
Hva? Holmgang?
Vinneren tar over eiendommen og kona og alt mulig til taperen. For det er sånn reglene er, ikke sant, Olav? Hørte du med Olav at reglene det er sånn de er?
Stemmer det du sier der, ja, gjør det.
Ja, men Arvid, du eier jo ingenting.
Professional duelists and warriors used holmgang as a form of legalized robbery. They could claim rights to land, women, or property and then prove their claims in the duel at the expense of the legitimate owner. Several of the sagas describe berserkers who abused holmgang in this way. Landnámabók describes a number of holmgang duels, fought in instances, in which latecomers to Iceland arrive, only to find that all the habitable land has been claimed by those who came before, or they are unable to obtain property due to high land prices or personal poverty. By challenging a landowner to a duel, these adventurers have the opportunity to obtain a farmstead for the price of a battle. To a large extent due to such practices, holmgang was banned in Norway in 1014, and banned in Iceland in 1006, as a result of the duel between Gunnlaug and Raven. I will come back to that specific holmgang later in this presentation. Holmgang was often fought 3 to 7 days after the challenge, but also sometimes right after the challenge, depending on the circumstances. If the challenged part showed up to the holmgang, but not the challenger, the latter had no right to swear an oath anymore, nor has he the right to testify in a trial. He has lost his honor and his word is now no good. He has become the laughing stock of the community and will be ridiculed for being a coward and having no honor. If the challenger showed up to the holmgang, but not the challenged, the challenger would shout, knighting, 3 times and put a mark on the ground, and the challenged had lost everything he owned, his entire honor, and he were now an outcast and could be killed by anyone. The shame would also be cast over his wife and family, and they would therefore expect and pressure him to fight.
Hva? Sitter du her og gjemmer deg, eller?
Jeg gjemmer meg ikke, jeg sitter og tenker.
Altså, du kan bare glemme å gjemme deg. Hvis ikke du stiller opp på den holmgangen, så blir du niding, utstøtt. Så kaster du skam på meg indirekte.
A knighting had to flee the country for a certain amount of time, usually 20 years, but it could also be for the rest of your life. Your family and others were forbidden from helping you in any way if you had become a knighting, and the shame would also fall over them. It was possible, if anyone was unwilling or unable to defend their claim, to get a skilled warrior or a friend to fight instead of oneself. What the person stepping in for someone in a holmgang got for doing this, or nothing at all, the sources are silent about. We have some examples of how holmgang was done in practice. The match itself often took place in a square, marked by a rope stretched out between 4 corner posts. In one example, the duelists had 3 shields each. When one of the fighters lost his 3 shields, the holmgang moved into a 3 by 3 meter area, where the god's decision became clear. Fighters had to fight within these limits or they lost. The first holmgangs probably ended in the death or incapacity of a fighter. Killing an opponent did not constitute a murder and therefore did not lead to a crime or restitution payment of any kind. Later rules made holmgang in a more ritual direction and you could lose either with first blood, if you lost your weapon, or if you stepped out of the agreed area. This was done so there would be less deaths, because we know the Vikings often sorted to holmgang and if this ended in death every time, the male Viking population would be significantly diminished, making them unable to rule the seas and the European continent, as they did for a long time. And we also know that in the later Icelandic version of holmgang, which was intended to avoid unnecessary loss of human life and excessive profits, they would usually fight to first blood or to one yielded, and the most that the winner could get, unless the dispute concerned a particular property, a specific items, animals or land, was 3 silver marks. This was to remove the profit you potentially could get by challenging someone, making it impossible for a skilled warrior to gain someone's property or valuables. They would only get 3 silver marks. Because the size and experience of the fighters would of course have a lot of influence on the outcome of the fight. A big experienced fighter would have little trouble defeating a smaller, inexperienced fighter, and status did not protect you from a holmgang challenge. A poor person could challenge a noble person. Fighters were allowed a certain number of shields that they could use. According to the sources, this was usually 3. This was due to the opponent's strikes could break a shield if it was hard and well enough placed, and the challenged would always strike first. The sources differ in how long a holmgang usually was. Some claim that the battle could last for days, but most of these fights probably lasted a lot shorter than that. Fighting with sword, shield and maybe even chainmail, you would tire fairly quickly. Like in a modern boxing or mixed martial arts match, with 2 equally matched fighters, the opponents are exhausted after the fight, a match that lasts for less than an hour. And like in these matches, there probably also were times when an underdog would win with a lucky punch, or one of the fighters was much more skilled and powerful than the other, and the holmgang duel was resolved quickly.
Kjør holmgang!
One description of this, we find in Viking saga, where Eyjolf's first blow cut off a Scott's foot. A Scot then yielded and paid his opponent to release himself from the duel, and live the rest of his life as a cripple. Further, the loser in the duel, although wounded and defeated, had had a chance to prove his manliness and bravery by standing to the challenge, alive and his honor relatively intact. But we have examples of holmgangs that lasted for a long time, and Thorstein's Terstangerhogs tells of a duel between Thorstein and Bjarni that lasted so long that they stopped multiple times to rest and refresh themselves. When the god's will had been known and there was a winner, the families and relatives had now no further cause for hostilities. Even if death was the outcome of the holmgang, the rules of holmgang specifically prohibited the relatives of the slain man from seeking compensation. In Gunnlaug Ormstunge saga, the saga of Gunnlaug's serpent tongue, the poet Gunnlaug left his fiancée, Helga, and went abroad to win honors. On his departure, he swore that he would not return until he had visited 3 kings and 3 jarls. But, when he had finally reached the goal, it had been too long, and Helga had married his rival. Gunnlaug was so offended by the broken engagement that he challenged Raven to holmgang. There are 2 different stories in the sagas about this holmgang. In Gisli Sursen's saga, Raven had the first strike because he was the one that had been challenged. He stabbed Gunnlaug's shield, but he stabbed it so hard that the sword broke under the handle. The tip of the sword sprang up and hit Gunnlaug on the cheek, leaving him with a minor bleeding wound. When this happened, their relatives and other men ran in between them and stopped the fight, including Gunnlaug's father, Elunge. Gunnlaug said, "Raven, I mean you have been defeated, as you are now unarmed." Raven replied, "And I think you have been defeated, since you were wounded."
Arvid, what in hellheim do you think you're doing?
Gunnlaug was now agitated and angry, saying that the dispute was not settled. But his father insisted that they not continue the holmgang and stopped it. Gunnlaug was not happy about this and is said to have hissed, "I wish that Raven and I could meet another time, where you, my father, cannot stop us." Because of this holmgang, the very next day, a new law was enacted, and holmgang was banned in Iceland. In the other Gunnlaug saga, after the ban in Iceland, the duelist leaves for Norway to fight again. And this time it ends in a tragic result for both. Raven died in the duel and Gunnlaug suffered injuries that caused his death shortly after, and Helga was now a widower. In another example we see several people fighting in a holmgang. In Ljosvatninga's saga, another form of holmgang is mentioned. Here, the duel has 4 men, on each side. The challenge was offered by Hrolfr as either a duel, 1-on-1, with his opponent Eyjolfr, or with 4 men, on each side. It was agreed that the challenger had the privilege of choosing who the additional men would be on each side, and Hrolfr chose mercenaries and robbers to fight alongside him, and won. When Christianity tightened its grip on the Nordic countries, holmgang became a thing of the past. It also wouldn't take long before the Viking era ended and the new Christian rulers now became the authority on justice and outlawed holmgang. Disputes would now be settled by the clergy, and according to biblical law, not according to old heathen traditions and beliefs. The time where you could challenge someone because they insulted or wronged you was over. The time of the holmgang had ended. I hope you liked this presentation about the Viking holmgang, and if you did, please like and subscribe, and remember to push the notification button, so you don't miss next time I upload. And check out my other videos on this channel to see if there are other topics you find interesting. And I hope to see you in the next one.